Okay, we are now recording. Thank you everyone for attending. This is the InstructLab CLI community meeting for August 8th, 2024. My name is Nathan Feinberg. I'll be proctoring the meeting today. So yeah, I mentioned this a little bit before we started the recording, but right now we are in the midst of trying to get 0.18 out the door. This has been a bit of a non-traditional release for us. We talked about that a lot in the last meeting. So if you're watching this recording or live and you're curious more about where things are in the state of that, please check the notes in the recording from the previous meeting. We sort of discussed more in length about sort of what's going on and why there's been a bit of a lack of community attention from some of the maintainer team recently. We got into that pretty heavily last week, so I don't want to reiterate all that this week. I have one agenda point. Again, I said this before the recording started, but if anyone else has anything they would like to discuss, feel free to throw on the agenda after my point. But I wanted to address something that Julia Denham raised to a lot of the maintainer team recently, which was a pain point for the community of folks opening up pull requests that were not getting sort of traction or reviews from the maintainer teams. So I was talking with Ihor about this, and we kind of schemed up a bit of an idea here based on something that's on the OpenShift organization. So in OpenShift, there is a model where you have maintainers and triagers defined by a code owner's file, and owners are sort of automatically assigned to pull requests. And this isn't done with native GitHub integrations. This is done with some custom OpenShift integrations. So obviously we don't have access to that, but what we do have in InstructLab, we already have defined contributor roles for maintainer and triage teams, primarily in the CLI repository. There's other repositories that only have maintainer teams, but I think we'll probably add triager teams as sort of the community grows, the project gets more mature. But in the CLI repo, we do have these teams, and we also have a tool called Mergify, which we've been using for a lot of the merge automation. So the idea that Ihor and I discussed was Mergify allows for this sort of behavior where we could select two or some random group of folks from the triage team. Those folks would be assigned to newly open pull requests. So there could be an initial sort of triaging of that by the triage team. This could be sort of low-hanging fruit, making sure that people have their CI check passing, making sure they've squashed and signed off on their commits as we require, and sort of making sure that that attention is given such that when folks from the maintainer team are able to get in and really do an in-depth review, we can focus on things like code quality. We can focus on things like making sure that the change aligns with sort of the direction the project is going in. Make sure that it's something that doesn't already have an open pull request for, things like that. So I wanted to raise this as an idea to the community. I think we would probably trial this in the CLI repo, and then we would move this to sort of other InstructLab repos as well if it was successful. But yeah, that's kind of the idea. I see Lisa has a comment here. This is Lisa, this is, I think, kind of a different topic. Is it all right if we discuss this? Could you maybe add this as an agenda point? Thank you. But yeah, as to what I'm just talking about here, does anyone have any thoughts on that? Any ideas, general thoughts, good idea, bad idea? BJ, go ahead.
I mean, it's interesting. I'm not entirely sure that I've seen the utility of the triage group.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, they're currently in the CLI repo. We have a requirement for 2 maintainers to approve. And so a lot of times, certainly for some of the PRs I've written, I can get one maintainer's attention, but it seemed to be hard to get a second maintainer's attention. And right now I'm sort of being relaxed and saying, hey, everyone's busy, we're trying to get 18 out the door. But when that's done, then I'm, going to be a bit more aggressive about demanding attention.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think with the point of right now the triager teams kind of seem because they don't have full approval permissions, but they're also elevated above a traditional contributor. So I actually feel like the triager team doesn't really have a very strong purpose right now, but I think this would sort of enable a purpose like that. So it's almost like a first wave of folks to do that reviews, and then that sort of takes pressure off of the maintainer teams to sort of have to deal with every single PR that's coming through. Because there's some things that might get open that are maybe duplicate PRs, or maybe they need some very simple sort of like I said, like CI checks or DCO signoffs, like taken care of before you can really get into the meat of the review. So I think this sort of solves both what Julia said and also kind of what you were saying, BJ, that like the triager team, I feel like doesn't have a strong purpose right now. I think it kind of gives purpose in a way that is both good from that side of things, but also like for the community at large.
Right. I guess, I mean, it's some way to look at the triage team is there's like a feeder team to become maintainers, right? It's the minor leagues.
Yeah, that too. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think also like when you have, like, Eher's a great example of this. Eher was a triager, was doing a lot of great work, being very proactive, like looking at pull requests, good reviews, stuff like that. And then that was sort of a path then for Eher to become a maintainer. But I think what I like about this sort of idea that we had about the automatic assigning is that it gets that it sort of, if you're elevated to the triage team, you're then sort of put in a position where you will sort of be assigned, and not to every single pull request, but people will be assigned randomly pull requests. They'll have the opportunity to sort of look at those, to get that community involvement, and then that can go on for so long until such time whereas maybe someone feels they're ready to be nominated for maintainer, if that's something they're interested in doing. And yeah, it just strikes me as like a good way to sort of flesh out the role of the triager team, and also sort of enable regular contributors, like community members, to sort of make sure that their PRs are getting looked at, because sometimes the maintainer teams are looking at other things, they're busy with other stuff outside of the actual repo maintaining. So
yeah, I mean, it's an experiment. Let's run it, see what we get.
Cool. Any other thoughts about this?
I have a thought. I don't actually know what's the size of triage team versus maintainer team. Is it enough just to have it for triage? So first,
So we track all that here publicly, and I'd say right now this is the triager team. So it's these folks, and then this is the maintainer team. So there's a bit of overlap here. Like BJ was kind of pointing out, this team hasn't really been like fully utilized, I think, in the way that was originally envisioned yet. So it may be worth, and this is something we can bring up maybe with the oversight committee, because they're sort of enabled to make snap changes to membership. It may be that the triager team needs to be updated a little bit as part of this maybe new idea. Because right now it looks like we have, I think, about 10 people here, and actually the maintainer team is a bit larger. And also the maintainer team, I think there's some duplicates as to triager and maintainers, which I think that'll need to be reconciled as well. But yeah,
I actually don't understand why people can't be in both groups. When I was nominated, I was dropped from triager. I think if we would include maintainers in the triager group, so it would be a subset, it would make more sense, because it kind of is on one hand just unfair, maybe feels like offloading the more menial work to triager group, and also stealing the opportunity from contributors to get some reviews from maybe more seasoned engineers on the project. So I would suggest, if we assign, please include maintainers people into this random pool of people who get assigned.
Yeah, right. Could that randomness include people from both groups as opposed to a single group? Because then it would randomly assign maintainers and triagers.
I think that kind of gets us back though into like, what's the point of having, I guess, the two different groups? Because I think the only difference, if at that point, would be that maintainers have approval permissions and triagers would not, which maybe that's enough of a difference. Sorry, go ahead.
I think that's enough of a difference to keep both. I would just make it so that maintainers are triagers, and then you would pick from triagers group randomly. I don't know, like the original reason for the decision to not overlap the groups. Maybe there is a reason.
I don't think, and someone could correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think the original roles that we sort of came up with here, if we look at our contributor roles here, I think these sort of came from, a template that we got from the CNCF. So I think, honestly, like just at the level of maturity that the organization is at, I don't think this is something that we really talked about before. That's really come up. So that's part of the reason I want to kind of raise it here. I think we could potentially, I think it's maybe a separate proposal here, but like, I think it's one worth sort of entertaining. The idea that like triage teams, and not just for the CLI, but in, across the whole org, because this is like an org level sort of thing that we have. That triage teams are a subset of the maintainer teams. Sorry, I'm trying to talk and also take notes here. I don't know if someone else is actually able to take notes. But yeah, I think that's something that's like maybe worth bringing up. I wonder if it's worth maybe making a pull request to the contributor roles and having that be something that, we can have written out in this document. We can have a PR, and then we can sort of have the discussion there. I don't know if folks agree, but I think that might be. I'm definitely not against that idea. I think there's something to be said there, but I think it'd be good if we could have that maybe sort of in a proposed PR, and then we can sort of have that discussion there among the community and socialize it out on the Slack channel or something. But yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I think, maybe we have to try it to know, but we really should be thinking about whether this is going to speed along PRs and I think issue review as well. Or is this just going to actually slow things down because less people, will feel like they're assigned to them? So, however we do this, we have to make sure we're getting eyes on PRs and eyes on issues.
Mhm.
And not just another level of assignment. If maintainers wait until triagers look at everything, that would actually be a gate that slows things down.
So I
Right. I think
somewhat following.
it can
like,
work. We need to make sure we're keeping an eye on it, and that this is a way of speeding things forward by getting eyes on them quicker, and not a way of, just assigning and forgetting.
Yeah. So are you saying, Mark, like, just to make sure I'm understanding your point correctly, like it could slow things down because people won't feel like they need to be proactively looking at things?
Yeah. So we need to be careful, because right now, basically a PR goes in, it's assigned to all the maintainers essentially.
No, not right now.
Well, maintainers should feel that way, right?
Yeah, but I think that we've sort of established that that's not really working.
Yes, I understand
yeah.
that. Yep. So now we need to, so let's try something different, and this will work, but we need to make sure it's not just the same thing with fewer people.
Yeah.
Make sure.
I see your point. Yeah.
And it
really
should
need is a
help,
bot.
because fewer people will be assigned, fewer people should be more focused, right? It should work.
What we really need is like a bot that goes through and says this PR has been not receiving the attention it needs from maintainers, for some time, and then that's when a nudge is important.
Yeah. I mean, we do have the, this was another thing I actually had brought up with Julia. If someone else is able to take notes, I would really appreciate that, because I'm having a really hard time participating and also writing down what folks are saying here. But yeah, I think one other thing I'd said to Julia is, like, so right now we do have the stale bot. And right now the stale bot is set up so that if like an issue or a PR hasn't been touched in 90 days, a stale label is added. So one thing I had raised with Julia, I've been going through the stale stuff just kind of as a daily practice, trying to crimp down the backlog a little bit. But one possibility is that maybe we reduce the amount of time for the stale bot. 90 days is a pretty long time. I think we just kind of did that arbitrarily to start off with, but maybe it's something where, because the stale bot is very versatile in that we could have maybe a 7-day period or something a lot shorter that was just maybe like needs attention, hasn't been touched in a week. And we could all have that only run on like new PRs. We can still have a stale label for stuff that hasn't been touched in like a long time. But yeah, like the stale bot could be maybe a bit more like a life cycle check bot, something like that. That could potentially help. I I know that with the GitHub teams, it allows you to tag people. So maybe if something hasn't been touched in like a week, it tags the triage team or it tags the maintainer team, something like that. Yeah, it's another possible idea.
Perhaps a minor point to the stale
Yeah.
label, but maybe it's also something to consider. The name of the label, it doesn't reflect necessarily what we want to happen. Like stale, if I'm a contributor, if my PR is marked as stale, maybe I can read it as a reflection on my work, and not that maintainers are now expected to give proper attention to this because it's
yeah. If it was like a 7-day thing, I don't think we would call it stale.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's still like stale bots are pretty ubiquitous. I think we should always have like stale, but I think maybe the bot itself can basically just does timed like labeling. It's using like a stale bot GitHub action that just does like timed labeling. So like this would be like maybe like a new label, like needs attention or like needs triage. I think that's something that's being done in the taxonomy repo right now. So maybe JJ or Joe, folks familiar with that, could speak to maybe some success they've had over there with that. But yeah, I guess that's so we've kicked around a few different ideas here. I think we have sort of the Mergify approach where we're assigning triagers. Ihar has made the point that we should probably have a discussion as to whether triage teams should be subsets of maintainer teams, which I think definitely has some soul. Or rather, maintainer team, I guess, would be a subset of the triager team. I should fix that, actually. I think I wrote that wrong. So that all maintainers are triagers, but not all triagers are maintainers. And then, yeah, BJ and Mark making the good point of like, perhaps the stale bot could be reconfigured to make sure that folks are more proactively looking at things, and maybe getting tagged in PRs. I will say, just for historic context, early on, we were using code owners files to an extent, but I think we did away with that because the idea was that if you have code owners, then people are just getting constantly notified and they're not going to be actually looking at things because of sort of the breadth of notifications they're getting. So that's why we kind of moved away from the code owners file. I would be a little concerned that the stale bot, if we make that into sort of a ping you after a week bot, that like that's something that could trend to that. But I suppose the counter argument to that is that, well, if you're proactively reviewing things within a week, you're not going to be getting all these sort of notifications. So so there's probably a way to do that so that's not as big of a problem. But yeah, I don't know. So I guess coming out of this, I think probably the first thing we need to decide before we do any of this automatic notifying is the point that Ihar made about the should triagers be a subset of maintainers. Ihar, would you be willing to make like a PR to the community repo to update the language in the contributor roles doc to sort of propose that, and then we can kind of continue this discussion in the PR maybe?
Okay.
Awesome. I appreciate it. And if you can send me that once it's done, I will socialize it out to the community. And I'm happy to take on that piece of that. Any other topics around this, or any other discussion points around this before we move on to Lisa's point? Okay. Thank you all. This was very enlightening. This was some good stuff out of here. And yeah, hopefully this will kind of alleviate this pain point for folks. So great. Lisa, do you want to go ahead and talk about your point here?
Okay, I think my point is kind of related to the one we just discussed, though, because the PRs are open and it's not getting communicated back to the people who opened the PR what the status of the PRs are. And in the case of all of the taxonomy PRs, they've been delayed because of lack of end-to-end runs. And
So
they've been reviewed and ready to go, but there's not been an end-to-end run, so there's not been an update in the status.
So wait, is this about CLI PRs or taxonomy PRs?
Well, when I heard this from Julia, it was about everything. It wasn't about one versus the other.
Okay, well, so this meeting is really only for the CLI. This is the CLI community meeting, so we don't really the taxonomy PRs isn't really something that we would discuss in this forum. The CLI PRs, that sort of, I guess, is back to the topic that I was making. So I guess is there like something in addition to that you wanted to mention, or?
Okay, so I view the taxonomy PRs as being blocked by the CLI at this point, and lack of end-to-end
How so?
runs.
Well,
Lack
the
of end-to-end run. Is
how
that not
are the
part of the
end-to-end?
CLI?
No,
Okay, sorry, my bad.
that's okay. This might be a topic for the Tuesday community meeting. We have a community meeting on Tuesday that's sort of more the organization at large. So if this is something that is like pertaining to the organization at large, like that would probably be the forum for that.
And maybe also the taxonomy triage meetings that's one today. I think it's every day, but the Tuesday and Thursdays are the main ones.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this got discussed at the taxonomy meeting yesterday.
But yeah,
okay.
the communication part maybe it needs to be a bit more broader. So feel free to bring up on the Tuesday meeting on how to best communicate this.
Right. I think
Okay.
the challenge Lisa's facing is there is no call about the end-to-end runs, because it really depends upon all the piece parts, right? You need the CLI, you need SDG and training and eval and some machine with some GPUs to run all this thing so that we can take the public taxonomies contributions and test build them and so on. And so that, I think that's where we have all of the parts, but none of the whole. There doesn't seem to be a place.
Sorry, go ahead, BJ. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah, I don't know where the right community is that is the owner of that process, right? Because it's one thing to have a public taxonomy repo, but if you never build anything in it, that sort of defeats the purpose of having it.
I'm gonna say one thing and then Charlie, you go ahead. So the E2E runs that you guys are describing have never used the CLI. That's never been a thing. That was the E2E runs have been done with sort of tooling that was sort of used with IBM's Vela cluster, which was never the CLI. It was always a different group of repositories. Again, this isn't really the meeting to be talking about this, but I'll go ahead and just say this since we are talking about it. So the E2E runs were paused basically because they were originally being run by the IBM research team. There was a handoff that was supposed to be done for Red Hat engineers, but then the Red Hat engineers were basically then told that our focus needed to shift toward RHEL AI, which is a downstream product off of InstructLab that we're working on. So, you know, I'm a member of the engineering team. I can speak for the engineering team that, I think many of us would like to be doing the end-to-end runs, but, we have to be doing what we're told to do. And, we work here, like those are our jobs. I think probably the way to go, but I also agree very much, just to be clear, with the sentiment of like the communication has not been great and like the runs have been paused for a long time. It's not something that I personally would have liked to see, but it's also something that for myself and a lot of the engineering team is just not in our control. I think there's sort of two problems with this, which is that one, and this goes back to sort of BJ and Lisa's point, that like there hasn't been a great forum to discuss this anywhere, which is probably why we're now discussing it in this CLI meeting. But also I think sort of there's been a not great division of like the responsibilities here. So my recommendation, I think, to kind of move forward with this, because I do think it is something that is not okay and needs to be resolved, is the ultimate authority, I guess, in the InstructLab organization is the oversight committee. So that's a group of 7 folks. It's made up, I think, of folks from both Red Hat and IBM. So I think maybe the oversight committee needs to be sort of making a decision as to the ownership of these runs. And, I think the original idea was that IBM research would hand it off to Red Hat, but then these Red Hat engineers, myself and others, have been sort of been told to do something else. So maybe the ownership structure needs to change. Maybe the priorities need to shift somehow. I very much agree with the sentiment, and I think it is something that needs to be addressed. But I can say, speaking as a member of the engineering team, that for those of us who are not in management, it's not really something that was within our control. Charlie, I don't know if you want to add anything on to that. Oh, you're on mute. We cannot hear you. Oh, he's giving you the finger, the weight finger, not the other finger. I assume he's dropping and rejoining. Okay, we'll just give him 1 sec. All right.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Hear you now. Yes, go ahead, Charlie.
Okay. What I was going to say is that the hope of 0.18 is that the tooling that we release will be what is used to run these end-to-end runs. Like what Nathan was saying is that like a lot of the stuff used to be done on separate tooling that we didn't create. It was kind of handed to us. But the hope is that the CLI will eventually be like the source of truth for running upstream, downstream, all sorts of things. And that's why we've been kind of working hard to get it to that state. But yeah, I just want to echo that the CLI was never the thing that ran these end-to-end runs. It was on a separate pipeline, separate hardware, and it was majorly not managed by the people in this call. So I would echo that the oversight committee is probably the place to take this, because I've heard it coming up in separate community meetings, and that we don't really have the power to change the state of things at the moment.
Yeah, we pontificated for a while there. Lisa, BJ, does that all make sense? Do you have any questions? Like, I definitely don't want to like give the impression I want to shut this down, but because it is like a concern, it's something that I've, much like Charlie, I've heard raised before, and I don't want to give the impression that we do not care. We do care. It's just sort of, I hope I've laid out the situation in a clear way, but I'm happy to answer any follow-up questions or thoughts, or, you know, we're already sort of discussing it. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, I understand the situation. I know why things are the way they are. I just not sure what the plan is to restart things, because at some point, right, the hurdle will be cleared and we'll get 18 done and Rel AI shipped. And then we really need to figure out who is the responsible parties for restarting the end-to-end runs of the public taxonomy, and what that community looks like, and who is driving it, and where does that community meet to discuss it, right? Is it the taxonomy triage call? Maybe it is, I don't know, but we need to figure out who those people are and get them to show up.
I agree.
Yeah, so I know that the tentative plan is that once 18 ships, and priorities have shifted away from the downstream prioritization, that this team will be focusing on upstream practices. I'm not sure if that is 100% inclusive of the end-to-end run, but it's something that we've at least discussed. But something that I will say is definite is that until 18 ships, these will not resume. So that's a definite.
Oh, I say with the caveat of unless the ownership model changes.
Yeah, but that's also a big if.
Exactly.
So
yeah,
I would say the most definite, like realistic, I should say, not definite, timeline is 18 has to get out the door before things like this resume, because the pipeline is going to be whatever exists in 18, if that makes sense. So that the old pipeline that used to exist to run these end-to-ends isn't going to be used anymore. It would be the code that we are working on in the CLI release.
I mean, in theory, the old repos could be used and updated if the idea was then to keep using like Vela infrastructure. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of ways forward. I don't want to make any promises as to what is and is not going to be used, because like that just hasn't been decided.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, but if we're being realistic, what I'm outlining is the most realistic way to resume the end-to-ends. I wouldn't say that dusting off the orchestrator repository is the most realistic.
We've made
timeline?
no plans, so I mean, I don't know what is realistic and not realistic.
I agree, but we have added all the functionality that used to exist in the back end to the CLI and to the libraries. So it would be the most realistic and straightforward approach is to use the repositories that we've created over the last month and in the 0.18 release. That's all I'm saying.
I'm not opposed to that for sure. Yeah.
Yep. I'm just trying to outline the most realistic thing so we can give some people some expectations of what vaguely to expect. I highly doubt we are going to use the existing backend.
I imagine the concern, and like Lisa, I don't want to speak for you, but I imagine the concern is more the fact that they're getting done. I don't think it's really as important as to how they're getting done.
I agree, but what I'm outlining is that they're not going to resume again until the release is cut.
Until the tooling work for that. Okay. Go ahead, Lisa.
And unless you attend these meetings and if you've submitted a PR, you don't have any idea about what any of this is going on because it's not been communicated.
If you don't attend this meeting and you submit a PR,
if you don't attend these meetings, you don't know these things. And so if you're a person who submitted a PR and you're not attending these meetings, then you don't know why your PR is stuck.
When you say attend this meeting, you mean the CLI meeting and CLI PRs?
Any of them, CLI, triage, community. I've gone to all three.
Right. I think the issue, Lisa, the frustration she's expressing is that if you submit a taxonomy PR, it goes into an indeterminate state. And there's no visible expression on the website that we are not building at the moment because of XYZ. Right.
So is this something that's been discussed in those taxonomy meetings?
Right.
Okay. Yes. So has any action been decided on? Because those meetings happen every day, do they not?
I think we're waiting on somebody from, I think either sort of Kelly or Julia to perhaps put forward some language for the front page README on the repo, just to highlight the current status and basically expectation setting. I think where I recall it was left off. So
okay.
I think that Lisa, that should probably continue to be pressed in the triage meetings.
So just and forgive my ignorance here, but I know we have documents in terms of like how to make contributions to the public taxonomy. Do we make any assertions, promises about communication of PRs on PRs to contributors from the taxonomy triage team, maintainer team, admin team? Is that something that's outlined anywhere? Is there something that we've said that would be done that is not getting done?
I think there's a rough timeline for a turnaround, right? It might take a week or two to get through the initial triaging process, and then it would enter a training process, which might take a week or two to go through. But right now, not much is happening, and we don't really tell people why not much is happening.
Okay.
I know, Lisa knows, but other people don't know, and it sort of has a smell to it on the taxonomy repo.
Oh yeah, I agree, but I'm trying to think in a solution minded set here instead of just saying oh well, like we're not communicating, but like if communication is an issue, then it would be good to outline, like, do we need to update the documentation in terms of the contribution documentation? Do we need to change how the taxonomy team is responding to PRs? These are all valid points, but I'll go back to my original point that this is the CLI community meeting, so this isn't really the forum to have that discussion. But I would encourage bringing these points up in those meetings and seeing if there's action that can be done there. Because this is something I know has been talked about a lot, but I'm not familiar with any efforts being made to update those documentation, to update how the triage team, to update the website. So, so let's maybe, raise this in the appropriate forums and come up with actionable ways to address this. Yeah, I think Charlie, I'd like to move on from this. Do you want to have the last?
Yeah, just like a last comment. I understand that from an outside perspective, it's super frustrating that all this is going on. And I can only imagine that bringing it to multiple meetings is even more frustrating. You probably get a non-answer in each meeting. But just like for context, like the team that is running basically all these repositories, it's the same group of like 10-ish people. And we're, as Nathan kind of stated, we are being told to do X, Y, and Z. And we're trying our best to keep everything afloat and to move the project along. So just bear with us as we get back into normalcy as we release 0.18. And I just want to like assure people that the functionality in there is a lot better and different from what was in 0.17. So hopefully what we release in there and the change in bandwidth once we get that release out the door will improve all of the repositories and our focus on all of them as well. That's something that I hope will happen in the near future because I know that release is imminent at this point. So yeah.
Okay, so the next point we have here, someone has an issue with too many libraries. Who wrote this on the agenda?
I did.
All right, take it away here.
Yeah.
I assume you're not the someone.
Maybe I am. I don't know.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah, I suspect this person is in a similar position as I am, who is got more involved in the project after the decisions were made about splitting all these pieces into separate libraries. And I assume that the split has some implications in terms of how hard it's to package, to track dependencies and whatnot. Mm-hmm. I tried to do my best to reply to this person in comments about what I think was the reasoning, without necessarily agreeing with all of the reasoning. So I just wanted to highlight that and maybe to learn something that I don't know. What were the reasons behind that maybe I haven't listed in my last comment in GitHub? Because there is obviously a price about for this very granular split, and obviously we can. I guess the person may even question like the necessity of splitting at all, but maybe as a middle ground, maybe if they can question like whether we need all of these small pieces, maybe it could be fewer of them, maybe have a separate CLI repo, but then a single large like library. So I'm just I guess I want to learn like what you guys think like are the actual reasons for this.
Yeah. So I think one of the main reasons that we ended up going with the libraries and as granular as they are is for flexibility and speed of development. Because if we thought if we did a mono repo, it would limit the different use cases of the various libraries. And because they're so different, like eval, training, SDG, they're all very separate. They have their different priorities and they use different tooling at the end of the day. We thought that from an upstream perspective, combining them into a mono repo would kind of slow down the rate of development. It would kind of, not encourage research development and for researchers to kind of fork the separate pieces and work on them and make their own changes to them. So it was from we were trying to do something that we thought would help the overall community. I see how installing 6 different packages might not be ideal for some people, but I think as someone stated below, just pip installing InstructLab grabs all of them. So I see the worry here, but at least in my eyes, it doesn't seem like a huge problem at the end of the day. Nathan?
Yeah, I'd like to add on. So something else that Charlie did mention, but was like very much along the lines of is that, so like right now, like you sort of have InstructLab as a CLI, and then you have the 3 main components of like the sort of lab methodology is outlined in the paper, which is sort of the SDG, the actual training, and then evaluation, which is not so much aligned in the paper, but it's more of something that was used within the paper and it was used subsequently for evaluating these models. So part of the reason that we wanted to do separate libraries was that right now, sort of the way things work is that the CLI consumes these libraries, and the idea is that we're providing a command line interface to take advantage of these functionalities. At the same time, We sort of were thinking long-term vision. You know, right now you have RHEL AI as a downstream of InstructLab, but InstructLab being an open source upstream project, we envisioned other forks of the project, maybe other downstream projects, products, what have you, whatever our Apache license is allowing for. And there very well may be sort of projects or products that wish to use, say, SDG, but are not interested in the training or the eval piece. Maybe they are doing a evaluation type thing and they want to use the InstructLab evaluation library, but are not sort of interested in having it be in the other pieces. So we wanted to try to modularize it as much as we can so that, for the purposes of what we're working on in the CLI, we could consume these components and sort of have programmatic implementations of these research philosophies without sort of hamstringing it so that this is something you can only use with the InstructLab CLI. We really wanted to make it as modular as we could so that the components could be consumed by actors outside the CLI. And this kind of gets into what Ehir had highlighted, his comment down here, which is that, one thing, we expect multiple consumers of the code. This was sort of in the eval and SDG docs. I don't know if we had a training one. We should have, but perhaps that didn't happen. Maybe it's in here. Anyway, and the other thing was the idea of, like, if we were ever to look at a REST API so that you could actually have InstructLab libraries as a service. That's another potential use case that, while we haven't explored at this juncture very early in the project, we didn't want to sort of preclude that kind of work by tying everything into a single mono repo or even two repos, because the two repos would even necessitate sort of the installation of a lot of stuff that a user may not necessarily want. So that's another reason, that motivation. Does that make sense? Or any questions or any holes to poke in it?
Yeah. I mean, the decisions were made. Reverting that would be a pain either way. But I just wonder, like, how it sounds like you were building this out for the future that may or may not happen. I understand there's a need. There are some plans to build some REST API services around that. Wonder if it's realistic to expect someone building like using training but not eval part. So whether we needed that kind of granularity, I would think that yes, installing CLI may not be necessary for when you run a service, but the rest probably would come in bulk. I would be surprised if someone takes one piece and not another, or at least they would be so much unhappy about these pieces be deployed as a single library that they would switch to something else. So in this regards, I don't know. There's a cost in to granular split. When you have a mono repo, you can better control code quality, apply new techniques, I don't know, introduce new linters, whatnot, like fix all the cases of some non-optimal language feature used, things of this sort. Now it's very hard to do that. So I find, not to be too pessimistic, but when I take a look at some of the libraries and the way the APIs are structured, I'm a bit I don't know, depressed in how interfaces are built. They sometimes feel like ad hoc. They were ripped off from the existing CLI library and just put into a separate one. I suspect it would be actually easier to rework some of these interfaces if we wouldn't need to now think about basically releasing a library with two implementations, one with a better API, so that now we can switch the client library, package to use the new interface and only then rip off the old one. It would be a lot easier to do it in a single repo. So while I kind of understand this general philosophy of splitting in pieces, and then it's like Unix way, right? But there's a huge cost there too. So
Oh, for sure.
I'm trying to on this project focus on maybe not as like important pieces like code quality and things like this, and it's evident that it is harder to do that now.
Yeah, no, super valid points. And like the monorepo sort of idea was definitely considered. And there were definitely very real pros and cons of both of these approaches here. I think I agree with a lot of the concerns you raised. I would probably say and maybe this is me sounding overly optimistic, but you know, this project is still pre 1.0. This is still a very young project in terms of, you know, general open source software projects. So my hope, my dream, if you will, is that, you know, a lot of these things, divergence in API, you know, references, having consistent code quality and, you know, linting rules and things like that across the organization. I think I agree that these are not things that currently exist, and that is somewhat depressing, but and again, this may be sounding overly optimistic, but I think given the maturity of the project and given what we hope will be the longevity of the project, is that, you know, these are things that we will get to reconcile. And as we grow and as we sort of are able to focus more on the upstream project, as the sort of downstream productization stuff stabilizes, that these are things that, you know, we will be able to reconcile and take care of and standardize, and that we could then take the work of having done all that and smooth out those edges and sort of build a foundation for sort of future innovation based off of these building blocks. So I think it is more painful right now in the state of things are, but I honestly believe, and I recognize that this is sort of my opinion, that having these as separate component blocks will help foster more long-term innovation than if we sort of did something that was maybe easier for now, sort of in the present, like a monorepo or maybe 2 repos. And I recognize that's very opinionated of me. You know, we had this debate at one point. There was back and forth. There were folks that felt the way I do. There were folks that felt other ways. Some folks in between. This was ultimately, I guess, the design decision that was decided upon. And I think, again, this is just my opinion, but the benefit of this is that it is easy to take, say, components that you might want and have them installed into your own downstream package or product you're working on, than try to do a monolithic thing and strip things out. But again, very valid points. I think, you know, kind of like you said, we're sort of at this point now. These design decisions were made a while ago, so there's not a lot that can be done about it at this stage. But I believe in the long term, it'll sort of help foster long-term innovation. But I agree that it does introduce pain points now that I think we should and will address in the coming months.
Appreciate the background.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of this is documented. I don't actually know. I can see if there's maybe somewhere where we maybe wrote this out a bit more. The dev docs repo is where we tend to put a lot of this. But if I can, I'll peek around that when I have some time here, and I'll share that with you, and I can share it with other folks in the community as well. I'll put it in this issue if I can find that, so that context is there. But I appreciate you raising this, because it is good for us to sort of get together and sort of maybe reflect as to like, why are we doing the things that we're doing? So yeah. If anyone else, by the way, from the maintainer team or the community wants to chime in on this or has thoughts on this, I'd say please comment on that issue, because I think we should make a habit of having these conversations publicly. Of course, people can watch the recording of the meeting, but I don't think that's always going to happen. So having it in this GitHub issue would probably be a good place to have that. Do we have any other topics for today? We have, oh, actually, I think we're technically ending at 55. So yeah, we are ending at 55. So I'm actually going to cut it here. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. Carol will be sending it out. Thank you very much.